Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about percent of change. Our content objective is students will be able to find the percent of change between two numbers. Our language objective is students will be able to state using complete sentences the answers to percents of change problems. And why am I learning this? Well, it's important for real-world problems such as figuring out the percent discount you received on an item. So just a bit of background knowledge. We did problems like this before where we were able to find the selling price after a markup and things like that. We found tip. We found the how much you would pay after a tip. We would find commission and things like that. So here, what I want you to look at is the original amount. So here, if the original amount was $12, the new amount would be $16.80. Now, using the same thing, now if you were to buy 20, then it would cost you $28. So, now what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about percent of change. Percent of change is essentially the ratio of the amount of change to the original amount. So if a number increases from the original amount, it's called a percent increase. Then, of course, if a number decreases from the original amount, then it's called a percent decrease. So, for example, from 30 to 37, it obviously increased. And then from 60 pencils to 24 pencils, that's obviously a decrease. So if you look at percent of change, you could express it as a ratio. So in other words, a proportion as well. So here, if we want to know the percent, we're going to do n over 100 equals the amount of change over the original amount. Okay, it could be thought of as this as well, part over whole. We like using the amount of change over original amount so that way you know which numbers go where. Then of course we also have the option of using y equals kx, where y is the amount of the change, k of course is the percent of change, and then x would be the amount before the change. So if you want to use it in terms of this is my original amount, this is the amount of change. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. It says from 5 to 7. So obviously this is a percent increase because the numbers did get bigger. So if you want to use the proportion, we're going to do n over 100 equals, what's the amount of change? Well, it went from 5 to 7, so that change was 2. And then the original amount was a 5, so I would put a 5 there. Now here you're going to solve for n. This one, what I'm noticing, I could figure out the constant multiplier. I can see that 5 needs to be multiplied by 20 to give me 100. So that means I'm going to multiply 2 by 20 as well, which is going to give me a grand total of 40. So here, 40 does represent the percent. So I would say the percent of increase is 40%. Now, if we were to solve it using the equation, just a friendly reminder, this is the amount of change. So how much did it change? It changed 2. I don't know the percent of change. That's what we're trying to solve for. So we're going to leave k there. But x does represent the original amount. The original amount was a 5. So we're going to go ahead and put a 5. This means k times 5. So I would have to divide both sides by 5 to figure out the value of k. So here I'm going to go ahead and convert this into a percent. Now, really similar to this, I noticed 5 can be changed into a multiple of 100. So if you wanted to, you can multiply by 20 to figure out what that percent is. You would see that's 40%. Or, of course, you could simply divide. You can do 2 divided by 5 and say, well, 5 goes into 24 times evenly. And to change this to a percent, move your decimal over 2 spots, and you still would end up with 40%. So you definitely have your options. Okay, so now let's find the percent of change and identify it as an increase or a decrease. So immediately I'm going to say it's an increase. Why? Because the values did get bigger. So using the proportion, we're going to go ahead and set it up as the amount of change over original. Of course, n stands for the percent. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it as n over 100. Equals the amount of change. How did 10 become 15? It changed 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put 5. Now the original amount was a 10, so I'm going to go ahead and put a 10. So here I'm going to look for the multiplier. So what is 10 being multiplied to give me 100? Fortunately, this is an easy number. It is 10. So since 10 times 10 gives me 100, I'm going to go ahead and multiply the numerator by 10 as well, which would make n a 50. So that means the percent of change is 50, and that it is a percent increase of 50%. Now, to solve it using an equation, again, y is going to be the amount of change. So since it went from 10 to 15, it is going to be a 5. I don't know the percent of change, so I'm going to leave k there. But x represents the original, and since the original is 10, we're going to go ahead and put times 10 there. So to solve for k, since it means k times 10, I'm going to do the inverse, which is to divide both sides by 10. We're going to see that they cross cancel there, leaving me with 5/10 equals k. So to turn this into a percent, first of all, you can divide, but real quick, I noticed 10 can be multiplied by a number to give me 100. And since I can do that, I think it would speed things up if I did it that way. I noticed 10 can be multiplied by 10 to give me 100. So if I multiply 5 by 10, it's going to give me 50, which means k is 50%. But again, you could of course simply divide it as well. This would work just the same. Okay? So we have both methods, and you'd be able to use any of them. So one thing I want to reiterate is that it is a 50% increase. Why? Because the values went from a 10 to a 15. So the values did increase. Okay, so now from 12 to 9. So immediately I'm going to say this is a percent decrease because the values went down. So using the proportion, I'm going to go ahead and set it up as n over 100 equals the amount of change. So it went from 12 to 9, so that changed by 3. And the original was a 12. So now what I'm going to do is figure out what that constant multiplier is. Well, I need to figure out how did 12 become 100. Well, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, so I'm going to go ahead and use a variable. I'm going to say 12 times a multiplier, m, is going to equal 100. So let's solve that. If 100 equals 12 times some constant multiplier, I'm going to have to divide both sides by 12. And my constant multiplier is going to be 100 over 12, which can be reduced by 2, which is going to give me 50 over 6. But wait a second, that can be reduced again by another 2, which is going to be 25 over 3. So this multiplier was, oops, wrong one. This multiplier is 25 over 3. That's what gave me 100. So I'm going to have to multiply 3 by 25 over 3 as well. So n is going to equal 3 times 25 over 3. Oh, look, I can cross cancel and see that the percent of change is 25%. Now that's definitely one option. Now, what else could you have done? Your other option would be to set it up using your equation y equals kx. Y being the amount of change, so it changed from 12 to 9, so the change was a 3. I don't know the percent of change, so we're going to leave k there. That's what we're solving for. But I do know x, which is the original amount, which I'm going to go ahead and put as 12. So here, all you're going to have to do is divide both sides by 12. And I'm going to see here that k is going to be 3 over 12. But wait a second. That can be reduced to 1/4. Now 1/4 is nice. Why? Because 4 can be multiplied to give me 100. What would I have to multiply by? 25. So by multiplying by 25, I would see that the percent is 25%. So this is going to be a percent decrease. Why? Because the values did go down. Number 3, why don't you pause the video and try this one by yourself? So for number 3, it says from 120 to 210. We're going to set up our ratio as n over 100 equals the amount of change over the original amount. So that means we're going to have n over 100 equals, well, how did 120 become 210? Some of you could probably do this in your head. Otherwise, if you can't, you're just going to find the difference between these two numbers. So 210 minus 120 is 90, so the amount of change is 90, and your original amount is 120. Now what we're going to do is, before you do anything, it would be helpful if you reduce this. I notice I can divide both of them by 30, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it's going to leave me with n over 100 equals 3 over 4. Now this makes things a little bit more simple. Why? Because then I can see easily 4 times what is 100 is just 25. So what's my percent? My percent is going to be 75%. And because it's going up, it's going to be a 75% increase. But of course, there is another way to solving this. You could also solve it using the equation y equals kx. Y being the amount of change. It went from 120 to 210, so the amount of change was 90. K is your percent of change. I don't know it. That's what they're asking me to find, so I'm going to leave K as my variable. I do know X. X represents the original amount, and that is 120. So we're just going to go ahead and solve for K, which is to divide both sides by 120. We're going to cross cancel. So here we have 90 over 120. Again, it'd be a good idea for you to reduce these two values. If it helps, just cross out the zeros and then reduce. If you reduce by 3. So notice I showed you two different ways. Here, I reduced both by 30, but here I crossed out the 0, and I'm going to be left with 3/4. But once again, to convert this into a decimal, you can simply divide. 3 divided by 4. Or, because this denominator is a number that can easily be multiplied to give me 100, I'm going to go ahead and do that instead, which is 25. So if I multiply, I'm going to get 75%. So this, again, will still give you the same answer. It's a 75% increase. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is if you don't have a denominator that can be multiplied to give you 100 easily, you are going to have to just divide. It will give you the same exact answer. This is just one quick way of doing it. Okay, once again, go ahead and pause the video and try this one by yourself. Okay, so what's the first way to do it? Okay, so one way would be to set it up using a proportion. N over 100 equals the amount of change over the original amount. So here, n over 100 is going to equal the amount of change from 80 to 50 to change 30. And the original amount is in 80, so we're going to have 30 over 80. So that's one way to do it. You can go ahead and solve by trying to figure out the constant multiplier, or you can just also use the equation y equals kx. So y is going to represent the amount of change. So from 80 to 50, it's a change 30. Now k is a percent of change. We're going to leave it as k because that's what we're trying to solve for. But x is the original amount, and that's why we went ahead and put 80. Now to solve for k, we're going to have to divide both sides by 80. And by doing that, you are going to end up with k equals, here you can even cross cancel, you get 3/8. Now 8 can easily be multiplied to give me 100, so if you divide these two, you would end up with 0.375. Okay, so to answer this as a percent, you would have to move the decimal 2 places to your right, which would make your percent decrease, since it's going down, 37.5%. Okay, so background knowledge. So we've done problems like this where we've asked for discount, right? We've used proportions, we've used equations, and we were able to figure out what that percent is. Now here, what we're wanting you to see is what is the percent of change. The percent of change was 25%. We were able to figure out the amount of change, which in this case was $3.75. The original amount was your original $15. And what was the amount after? It was $11.25. So these are all related to what we were doing in the past, what we're doing now. So let's take a look at number 5. It says, Andrea's father went on a diet. When he started the diet, he weighed 250 pounds. So right now, I know this is what we call the original. Okay? At the conclusion of his diet, he weighed 175 pounds. Find the percent of change in his weight. So first things first, let's look at the two options. We can look at the proportion. And so here, let's try solving it this way. So using the proportion, we're going to use n over 100. So what's the amount of change? What was the change in his weight? It went from 250 to 175. So the difference was, let's see, 75 pounds. Okay, but what did he originally weigh? He originally weighed 250 pounds. So right away, I can see that I can reduce by 25. So that's going to leave me with 3 over 10. So you can quickly go ahead and multiply both sides by 10. Sorry, not sides, both the numerator and denominator, to figure out what n is. So in this case, n is 30%. So this means there was a 30% decrease. Why decrease? Because Andrea's father was losing weight. Now, is there another option? Yes, the other option would be to use your equation. So here, what was the change? The change was 75 pounds. Do we know the percent of change? Nope, so we're going to leave it as a K. Do we know what his original weight was? Yes, it was 250, so we're going to multiply that by 250. So to solve for K, we're going to have to divide both sides by 250. And that's going to leave me with K equals 75 over 250. But again, you can see that we can reduce by 25, leaving you with 3 over, let's see, 10. This is not a percent though, but I can easily change 3/10 into a percent by simply multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 10. So this means it's 30%. So I would say, like, once again, it is a 30% decrease. Why is it a decrease? Because Andrea's father lost weight instead of gaining weight. Now, what if the problem started like this instead? What if it said, Andrea's father went on a diet. When he started the diet, he weighed 250 pounds. At the conclusion of his diet, he lost 75 pounds total. Find the percent of change in his weight. So, is this any different? The answer is no. Why? They made it easier for you. They told you the amount of change. Because he lost 75 pounds, that is considered the amount of change. It doesn't mean he currently weighs 75 pounds. It means that was the amount of change in his weight. So this one actually gave you the value for you. You didn't have to calculate it yourself. So you want to be careful and read everything thoroughly. Number 6, why don't you pause the video and try this one by yourself. So the bus driver usually makes 25 stops per day. Today she made 80 stops. Find the percent of change in the number of stops the drivers made. So again, you can set up using a proportion. The amount of change was 55. The original was 25. Then of course you can also use the equation. So y equals kx, y being your amount of change, so that's your 55, and x being the original amount, which is 25. Just divide both sides by 25. And you're going to see that K equals 55 over 25, which I can see can be multiplied to give me 100. So some of you might say, well, Miss Dang, could we reduce this? Yes, we can, but why when you already know that 25 can be multiplied to give me 100? So I'm not going to change it for that reason. I'm just going to say, okay, to make this 100, I'm going to multiply by 4 here, multiply by 4 here. So if we do 55 times 4, we're going to get 220%. So I would say it is a 220% increase. Now, I do want to talk about if you didn't see that and you divided and you ended up with 2.2. You want to make sure, because it's a decimal, that you're moving your decimal over 2 spots to the right so that you can see it is 220%. Now again, if instead it was worded like this, a bus driver usually makes 25 stops per day. Today she made 55 more stops. Immediately, I want you to recognize that they gave you the amount of change, so you didn't have to figure it out yourself. So again, read everything carefully, because some of you may just think of this as the amount of, you might not recognize this as the amount of change, and you might subtract them and get a different amount of change. So be very careful. Number 7, go ahead and pause the video and try this one by yourself. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over number 7. Number 7, you can set it up as a proportion. So you would have said, okay, from the amount of change, again, if you could do it in your head, that's great, but if you can't, simply find the difference between the two. Always do larger minus the smaller. And in this case, it's going to be 90,000. So 90,000 over the original, which was $720,000. Now here, if you reduce and divide both by 10,000, it would eliminate both of these zeros, just leaving me with 9 over 72, which is going to leave me with technically 9 over 72, but if you reduce both by a 9, you would end up with 1/8. Okay, so here is one way to do it, or you can use the equation. This was my amount of change, and again, technically it's 9,000, 72,000, but since they're all in thousands, we can just consider it as 9 and 72. If you divide both sides by 72, you still would end up with 1/8. So how would we change it to a percent? So here, unfortunately, even as a 1/8 for k, I can't easily turn this into a percent because 8 is not a factor of 100. But I can still solve it by simply dividing. So let me show that. 8 can go into 10 one time with a remainder of 2. 8 can go into 20 two times with a remainder of 4. And 8 can go into 40 perfectly 5 times. So this is my decimal form. K is 0.125. But to turn it into a percent, I'm going to have to move the decimal 2 places over. So I'm going to say it is a 12.5%, and since it went up, it is an increase. So that would be my final answer. Go ahead and pause the video and try number 8 by yourself. Number 8, I'm going to go ahead and quickly go over it. It's talking about a bicycle that's been discounted to a price of $90. What's the percent of discount? So here from 120 to 90, to set up a proportion, I would say the amount of change was 30, and the original amount, of course, is 120. You can divide by, technically, you can divide by 10 to cross cancel, but I notice 3 and 12 can be further reduced. You can divide by 3, so that's going to give me 1/4. Now what's nice about this is I can see immediately how 4 became 100. You're multiplying by 25. So if I do the same thing here, I'm going to get n equals 25. So this is a 25% decrease. Then of course you can also solve it using the equation. So the amount of change was 30 and the original amount was 120. Solving for k, we're going to divide both sides by 120. If you reduce both by 30, you're going to end up with 1/4 equals k. And again, this is 25%. You can read this as 1/4, which hopefully will give you that link of, oh, that's 25%. Or just like before, you can go ahead and change 1/4 in terms of a percent by multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 25. So that leaves me with a 25%, again, decrease since it's a discount. And again, please be very careful if they wrote it differently, such as this, a $120 bicycle has a discount of $40. What percent is the discount? So here they're providing you the amount of change already. They're not saying they're only charging you $40. They're telling you it was discounted $40. So that is the amount of change. Well, guess what? That concludes the lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, until next time, bye.